I record the full screen. Okay. Hi, my name is Katherine Snedaker. Welcome to Casual Conversations. This is our last episode in our third season, and we are approaching at this point the winter holiday break. And just want to thank IBIA and NABIS for their hosting. And I think NABIS just had a great conference on disordered consciousness, and that will be available. We'll be sending out more information about those recordings. And we will be back on the 6th of January to start our fourth season. So today I would like to welcome Aaron to Casual Conversations. How are you doing today, Aaron?
I'm good, Catherine. You? It's good to be here.
It's great to have you. I was trying to think, when did we first connect? It was like 6 months ago?
Yeah, about half a year ago, as we started the conversations about can recover and concussions.
That's great. No, it's been great to get to know you. So let's start at the beginning. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your childhood and what interests you, and sort of a little bit of background to the person that you are today.
Sure, absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you everyone for joining and everyone that's going to view this afterwards. Appreciate the time and hopefully get some value out of the discussion today. My background, I grew up in New England, as I was telling you, Catherine, and I was always playing sports. I come from a very athletic family. Both my parents were big athletes, and that's kind of all we did on the weekends, on the weeknights, me and my two older siblings. And so I grew up playing every sport, predominantly though baseball, and then switched over to lacrosse, and hockey was the main sport in our family.
That's a very Connecticut background there.
Yeah, very New England.
And I was part of the lacrosse leagues that we were just waiting for those baseball kids. We just, anytime you want to come play lacrosse, you don't even have to come to practice. You can just come to the games. That try the conversion factor there.
Exactly. So we grew up both in Massachusetts and in New Hampshire. And so, that continued up through high school. I went to St. Mark's School in Marlborough, Massachusetts, or Southborough technically. And my main sports there again were hockey and lacrosse. And then ultimately I ended up playing lacrosse collegiately at Babson College, which is just outside of Boston. And so really from childhood all the way through my collegiate years, most of what I knew and most of who I was sports and playing sports.
And that was definitely the connection to your family. And did it determine what holidays you took and where you traveled?
Yeah, so all of our summer vacations growing up were trips to Canada when my dad was recruiting for hockey.
Oh, so your dad was actually a recruiter.
Yeah. So he and my mom coached, and then we would also go to lacrosse tournaments down in Maryland and Philadelphia area with my mom. So definitely a huge part of our family, a huge part of our relationships. And like I said, both my older siblings also played collegiate sports. My brother played hockey at West Point, and my sister played lacrosse at St. Anselm. So, and I was the youngest of three, so I was kind of the last set of games that everyone was going to.
So I bet you spent a lot of time as a little child, like waiting for your siblings to play too.
Yeah, usually. Anytime I could, I would bring a hockey stick or a lacrosse stick and go off and play on the side. But most of our days were spent on the field or in a rink.
So your family identity was really around sports and athletics. So what was that like, making that jump from high school to college sports? How did that change?
Really, where it changed was in the commitment and the schedule. So at St. Mark's, it was a boarding school, and everything was extraordinarily structured. You know, we had class Monday through Saturday. We had practice every day, games Wednesday, Saturday. And so it went from a very structured environment. And then at college, there was a lot more free time, a lot more, though, commitment to your sport, where you're spending time in team workouts, team meals, footage sessions, and practices, etc. And so that was really the big shift for me from high school to collegiate.
And how did that determine sort of who your friends were too in your college space, where here you're at a new environment and you get to literally pick how to define yourself and who to hang out with?
Yeah, well, because of the commitment, because of the time you spend together, that sort of becomes your social circle. And of course, it extends beyond that, especially at the D3 level where I was at Babson. You know, I was involved in a lot more outside of sports, and got to, you know, connect with other kids throughout the school, who became my social circle. But you know, in general, it definitely influences who you socialize with, who become your lifelong friends, and who you form that bond with, just because of the time that you're spending with all these athletes.
Now, had you had the experience of being injured up until the concussion we'll talk about, but what was your experience of injury previous to this?
It was pretty interesting. I hadn't broken a bone until high school, which was very surprising for me and my family. But you know, in high school, I had broken my wrists collectively 5 times, and really, when it comes to a broken wrist, and I'll go down this path a little bit because I like comparing it to my mindset with a broken wrist versus a concussion.
That's
Is
exactly where I was going. So great.
okay, perfect. When you broke your wrist, it's a lot of physical pain, and you know, I would have surgery or I would get the cast on, and then we would cut a glove in half and tape it around my cast, and I would still try and go out and play, and you would try and fight through that pain. And my first concussion wasn't until my junior year in high school, and I was only out for a few days after I was diagnosed with a concussion. And part of that was me and my mindset being, all right, toughness is getting back in as soon as I can. Toughness is pushing this inside or fighting through the pain, which in hindsight, not the best approach to things, and certainly not how I define toughness anymore. But
Now, what year was that first concussion?
that was my junior year in high school.
I'm sorry, like chronologically around.
Sorry, relative to the wrists.
No, I'm sorry. Like what? Like it was that 2015.
Oh God, that was 2009.
2009. Okay. So that's just at the point, 2008, 2009 is just at the point where Dr. Bob Cantu is not, you know, his grading of concussions has been pulled off the shelf, but then it takes 10 years sometimes for that medical information to pass through. That's still the period of time where concussions could be falsely diagnosed, that you had to have loss of consciousness. So that's pretty early for the people around you to know how to handle you. And there certainly wasn't, you know, a protocol at that point.
Yeah, we were fortunate enough in my high school to, I think it was actually toward the end of high school when we got the impact test introduced. And that one's interesting. I've taken it probably 50 times. But a lot of times you hear about athletes trying to intentionally, what they call a sandbag it. So your reaction time is slower, or you're, you know, forgetting words intentionally when you set your baseline. The idea being that if you ever do get a head injury, you're able to, you know, pass it earlier, Now, obviously, they supplement that and complement that with other tests now and in my collegiate years. But that's really kind of the era that it was. Really, we were exclusively relying on that impact test.
Yeah, which has its own issues, whether you've slept that night, whether you've taken it before, whether you got in a fight with someone the right
Mhm.
before you take, if you're not, many things affect that. But at the time, you're right, that was the gold standard. I do think that to credit that it at least gave some context to, is this person ready to go back or not? And whether the
Mhm.
test was valid or not, or who was using it and why it was using it, it did give athletic trainers a piece of paper to say to the parents, it's not time to go back. It's a prop, but it worked. Or at least had people pause and consider whether the person should be returned, that there should be some sense of a barrier between them being ready or not ready. So who advised you with that first concussion when it was time to go back?
I was with the athletic trainers at our school, and they were phenomenal. The challenge, I think, at that time is they're relying a lot on the athlete and how they're reporting it. And coming from, jumping back in after a broken wrist, I tried the same thing with a concussion, not knowing much about it. And so I wouldn't report if I had a headache. I would say that I felt fine for X amount of days. And, that definitely expedited my return in the context of things. But um, that's ultimately who makes that call.
And I think that's very true. The last two research papers that my team and I published was, we asked high school students, you know, were you amplifying your injuries in your reporting to your athletic trainers to stay out longer, or were you minimizing them to get back sooner? And we definitely, 30% of athletes, more girls than boys, were minimizing to get back to school, and a little more boys than girls were amplifying to get back to sports. But very little I have seen in research besides ours have researchers asked athletes, are you being honest, because we're using you as the criteria of whether it's time to return.
Right, right, exactly.
And so how did that transition for you in college?
So college was a much different experience for me with concussions. I went through two prolonged recoveries. The first one was in my sophomore year of fall ball, and that recovery before I returned to play was about 7 months. Partially because we were heading into the winter, which was the off season, and it allowed us more time to really recover and approach it appropriately. Um, but I think by then there was a lot more tools and a lot more sophistication in how they were, and by they I mean athletic trainers and doctors, were looking at concussions and analyzing athletes. So that one for me was a lot different because I went from my first experience being so short-lived, and to this prolonged one that was, I had headaches for months, and so it was much different for me. But still, I had that mentality of, all right, I have the winter to recover, but I want to get back on the field as soon as we kick things off in the spring. And so it was kind of a similar mindset, but also taking advantage of that time that I knew that I had off anyway. Um, and then the year after, it was actually the same exact day, October 7th, on both years, is when I sustained the hit that gave me that concussion. And in my junior year, this is the recovery that ultimately ended my lacrosse career. And it took me about 2 years before I was working out again, back in the gym. And that one was a completely different journey for me from the first two. because not only was I battling with the physical symptoms of it, some that I hadn't experienced before, but even more so, it was an emotional battle, working through that and also trying to maintain my schoolwork and continue to go to classes, maintain my social life, um, and frankly maintain my sanity through the recovery.
What supports were helpful for you at that time? What were you leaning on to get through such a long, protracted recovery? What was working?
Well, initially, and in the early stages, my athletic trainers who were phenomenal at Babson, and I was also going to Boston Children's. So from the medical side, they were a great support system. But like I was saying, it was more so of a challenge on the emotional side, and there really wasn't a whole lot of support that I found effective as a student athlete going through that. Um, and this is actually a good introduction into the co-founder of Can Recover, Mike Santee. Really, I was struggling, and I would talk to family, I would talk to friends, but I also felt like they didn't fully understand what I was going through, and at the same time, I couldn't fully explain it in a way that they could understand. And my brother, who I mentioned played hockey at West Point, he had a teammate who was going through a similar recovery with a prolonged concussion recovery, and had actually introduced us. This was probably 5, 6 months into my own recovery. And at that point, that's when I found the most effective support was being able to talk to another student athlete, talk to a peer who understood exactly what I was going through, um, not just with the concussion, but with trying to balance school, trying to balance a social life. A lot of the physical symptoms that we had in this recovery that we didn't have in our previous concussions were very similar. And so knowing that there were others out there who could understand what I was going through and have been through it themselves was the most effective support that I had throughout my recovery.
Wow, that's awesome. And what the you would check in by phone? Did you meet with them? How did you all connect?
Yeah, so I met him. I met Mike in person the first time I had met him. I just went to one of my brother's games, and he was there, of course, on the sideline. So we talked for a long time, and then just continued to text and call. West Point's down in New York. I was up closer to Boston, so we would just periodically check in, or if one of us was going through something or had questions, it was just a very open conversation. And ultimately, that's what inspired us to start Can Recover. CAN's an acronym for Concussion Awareness Network. And really, what we were trying to do, because we didn't see it out there at the time, was build this support network of peers supporting peers through that prolonged concussion recovery. And that took us a while to really um, build out the concept and build out the network. But the way it ultimately got structured was, people would contact us and we would have that open line of communication to just be there for them and vice versa. And then ultimately, as that grew, we would connect people within our network to each other who were in more similar situations. So if Mike or I had to support a girl in high school who plays soccer going through it, down the road, she might form a better connection with someone else that comes in who is a high school female athlete who plays field hockey, for example. So that's really how it grew.
And what did you find the benefit for you at a time where you're recovering from, you're still not back at your sport, yet you're already giving to other people?
It was hard. Um, I mean, both of us kind of went through identity foreclosure, and we talked about growing up a little bit and how I come from such a sports ridden family, and that was a big part of our relationships. Um, that was probably one of the hardest things to come to terms with. Now, we didn't immediately say that I wasn't going to return to sports when I started going through the recovery, um, but it eventually became very apparent. And I think that was a struggle for me, and it was actually beneficial for me emotionally to help provide support for others going through it, because I felt like I could share what I was going through, which ultimately helped me as well as hopefully helped them. Um, but in terms of the in terms of the logistics of starting a nonprofit, that was definitely slow paced and painstaking. You know, you've got 100 pages of paperwork while you're trying to do schoolwork um, and have a spark of a headache. It definitely wasn't easy.
But it's something that you decided with everything else you were the load that you were carrying, that it was important for you to reach out to help other athletes.
Yeah, absolutely. I became extraordinarily passionate about it and still am. And, you know, going through it really makes you appreciate the challenge of it. And whenever you say the words, I wish I had this, or I wish I could do this, that's really where the inspiration sparks for a lot of nonprofits, for a lot of for profits, even, is what's out there that I need that isn't out there for me.
And,
Um,
and you're in Boston, you've got Bob Cantu at your back door, you've got Concussion Legacy, you Bill Meehan's up at Boston Children's. I mean, you sort of have the epicenter of uh, medical care.
yeah.
You were seen by the best.
Mhm.
Um, but I think that's where the concussion piece, there is no magic pill, magic scan, magic anything that's going to make this, heal faster. It's the journey, the process.
Yeah, absolutely. And everyone you mentioned, I've met with and spoken with during my recovery and after. Dr. Meehan in particular, like I said, I went to Boston Children's, and that team is incredible. Um, but yeah, I very quickly came to realize, even from supporting others going through it, that no one's journey is the same, and it's a lot more complicated than an isolated approach in an isolated field. So it's not just medical professionals that are part of this recovery. It's not just your friends. It's not just your family. It's not just Can Recover. It's not just Pink Concussions. It's a culmination of a number of things, um, and a number of tools that are really necessary to help someone through this type of recovery.
Yeah, as a social worker working in the first two clinics, I think I worked in a clinic 2010 to 2011, and then maybe 2011 to 2013. I wanted to provide social work support for, at this point, it was mostly high school, college students that were coming through, where the doctor would explain the logistics, or the doctor would explain the overall medical concepts. The nurse would come in and explain the logistics, but there was no one really there to sort of talk to, how does this work in your household, because you live in a fraternity house with 12 people, or you live by yourself in a single, or you live with your parents. There was nowhere to sort of that mental health support. And when I would try to get the clinics to support me doing that, they're like, oh, that isn't part of our medical model. That isn't a money maker. And then with Pink Concussions, that was me, as starting out to try to find a way to fund that. So it's that piece of, and I will get people, they'll come to me where the doctor says, yeah, I think you need, I think you need counseling. But I think too often, for a long time, that resonated as you're crazy, something's wrong with you, there's this mental issue, rather than people with brain injury deserve, that support. And it definitely sounds like, that's where you were working to try to get, that day-to-day support through the journey.
Yeah, absolutely. And you look at even beyond concussions, just but mental health in general, the stigma around it, 10, 15 years ago and prior was totally different than it is today, and particularly through the pandemic, which has exacerbated the attention on mental health. It's shifted pretty substantially, and right around, I think you were actually starting Pink Concussions right around when we were starting Can Recover, if not you were a couple of years prior. And you're right. The idea of just going and talking to a counselor, seeing a therapist had a whole different meaning, I feel like, at the time. And through my journey and through the journey of a lot of people that we supported, they would speak to therapists. Some were fortunate enough to have access to sports psychologists. And that's a huge component of it. And I am certainly not a medical professional, but I do feel that my mental health state through my physical recovery had a significant impact on it. I mean, there's those studies out there where they give two people with the same makeup, basically, and one person is stressed out, one person's lower on the stress scale. They give them the same cut or the same wound. One person will heal in a week and a half, one will heal in 3. And so I do feel that because of the bout that I was having with depression, anxiety, and trying to navigate my way through my recovery, it had a significant impact on it, for sure.
Were you asked questions about your mental health through that process and offered resources, and from the athlete mentality decided that you didn't need them? Or do you think that those just weren't pulled out at the time?
I think it was a little bit of both. I think more of what I was asked and the paperwork that I was filling out, the scales that I was filling out, and the ratings were predominantly on physical symptoms, but they do include some emotional symptoms, for sure. I forget the name of the one assessment, but it goes through a list of 30 some odd questions. And I think filling that out, I definitely wasn't true to myself in assessing my mental state or my sadness levels or my irritability, especially in the beginning. Toward the end, I started to acknowledge it more, but at the same time, I wasn't actively seeking out resources other than the work that we were doing with Can Recover, which for me was the best form of therapy. But at the same time, it wasn't, outright necessarily offered as an outlet, as a support tool.
There's a comment from Dr. Guzman that one issue we had referring patients for counseling from our TBI clinic is that the therapist didn't understand the cognitive and somatic symptoms. Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So, where do you find therapists that are trained in these symptoms and this process? And certainly as a social worker working within a TBI pediatric clinic, it wasn't part of the model. And I said, well, you have breastfeeding classes there and you have parenting classes there, why can't we include the journey of the concussion? Because the doctor didn't have time and the nurse didn't have time, but that wasn't the medical model to try to find that support. And I looked at different times trying to see, looking for funding. And this is another thing we talked about this morning, is that individual funders and funding wasn't about bringing mental health counseling to an individual. That's not really where funders were going. They wanted programs, they wanted support groups. So how do you set up groups? And for Pink Concussions, the internet at that time had, many options. I think I started my first online teen support group Team Concussion. I think that was 2009. So you were able to, Can Concussion came out of the website. Is that where you first created your
Yeah,
space?
predominantly on our website and sharing stories of student athletes. At first we were um, focused on collegiate athletes, high school athletes, because that's what we knew. And then we started to expand that a little bit into military personnel and what we called real worlders, people who might be in a car accident who are at work. And yeah, that's really where we started, though, was just sharing stories and having an open outlet and a free flowing dialogue. And it was pretty interesting as things grew for Can Recover. A lot of people would just send in a message and say thank you for having this source and sharing these stories, because that's really all they needed for support, or it helped them in some way to know that they're not the only one going through it. And that became really a motto for us, is that you're not alone going through this. There are other student athletes, there are other military personnel, there are other real worlders who have gone through this like you're going through it. And and then really in the more, I don't want to say severe cases, but in cases where people felt that they needed to talk to someone, that's when they would reach out and set up time to speak with us. And it's pretty cool. It's funny how things work online. It's not like it used to be, where you would look at necessarily a local network, and that was what you had access to. With the power of the internet, we had people from Europe reaching out to us. We had people all over Canada reaching out to us, and it was pretty interesting. We found out there was a Facebook group in Europe that was sharing our stories pretty frequently, and that's really how we were able to get the reach that we were.
That's awesome. And I think the internet provided a way that small nonprofits could make an international impact, and use that space in a powerful way. Is there a particular story or a particular interaction that you want to share about the time that you the time that can Concussion operate?
Yeah. Well, all of them become very personal. And the ones that really resonate are the ones that you have the heartfelt conversation of how bad it can get for someone for someone going through it, for someone that feels depressed, for someone that has suicidal thoughts. That's a heavy, heavy, heavy topic to talk about. And as a nonprofit, and being who we were, me and Mike, just two collegiate athletes, that's something that you obviously have to be super careful and delicate talking about. But I think the most resounding moments for me have been when either a parent, or we've gotten letters from parents, but particularly when we've gotten notes and comments from student athletes telling us how bad it got for them, and how this storytelling and this resource for them really helped them turn it around. We always said at the very beginning, when Mike and I started it, it was, like I said, it was a lot of work to get it up and running. But we told each other that if it helps one person, then it's worth it. And I think it certainly helped more people beyond just he and I. So it was absolutely worth the journey.
Do you have any advice to young people, young athletes, or those in the brain injury space starting their own nonprofits?
Yeah. Well, like I said, it can be a lot of work, and but at the same time, I realized you can work small, and you can also work through other established organizations to make a significant impact. One of the greatest resources for Can Recover was our network, and was building out really this small cohort of people who had gone through a prolonged recovery, who had used Can Recover as a resource, willing to volunteer their time to help us out, to provide support for other student athletes who were coming into the network, to run our social media, things like that. And so if you are going to start it on your own, and there's a niche that you really want to focus on and fill, then, you know, certainly go for it. It's obviously a need if it's a need for you, but at the same time, be open to looking at the organizations out there who can drive a significant impact with your help.
Well, and that kind of segues very nicely to you reaching out to me about 6 months ago.
Yeah, so an exciting announcement, and it's always exciting to make it right around or right before the holidays. But Can Recover, we started about a decade ago, and this past year we made the bittersweet decision to dissolve Can Recover. And I say bittersweet because it's sweet in the bitter in the fact that we worked so hard to get it up and running and provide the support that we were, but sweet in the sense that we know our decision is going to drive a more effective impact on the population that we were trying to serve. And so the reason that Katherine and I had originally connected is when you dissolve a nonprofit, one of the primary things you have to do is distribute your assets to other nonprofits, essentially. And what we wanted to do with the generous contributions that had been made to us was really move that money forward to organizations who were in a similar field, who had a similar mission, and most importantly, were supporting the population that we were aiming to support. And so Pink Concussions and one other organization are the two that we had decided to distribute our assets to. And we're very excited to work with Katherine on how those funds are used, and continuing to drive the support that she does and her team does through Pink Concussions. And we're also excited that she is carrying on the Can Recover legacy and the name and our story.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm so grateful, humbled and grateful that you reached out to us to help. You know, I know the technical word is dissolve, but you know, I prefer the fold into, and we will be putting up a Can Recover page on our website, and going back through the internet and seeing if we can collect, you know, some of that history and put together. When I started with the tagline in 2012 of sports, domestic violence, and military service, and I was told you got to pick a lane. You know, you can't go through those. And you in sports and military service also crossed, you know, two silos, crossed two lanes, which I think is so important. So we are so honored to be the recipient of the donations made to you, and to help carry on and have an internet home for you for the great work that you've done.
Yeah, no, it's well deserved with what you've built with Pink Concussions. And like I said, we're extremely excited to be able to work with you and carry that forward and continue to drive an impact.
So you may be dissolved in terms of, but I would rather have you
corporate filing. Yes.
Yes. Folded into the family. And I have, you know, when I definitely have ideas, and people are often surprised. I mean, we've had probably 90 interns over the decade, and probably 15 young men have interned with us. We certainly serve men in that are, you know, boyfriends, sons, fathers, especially fathers. We've had a lot of fathers for the group. So we're excited to to fold you into the family and feel like it's a really great fit for us, and be able to, somebody write, Aaron, Katherine, a fantastic news and partnerships. So yeah, so there's a lot of ideas I have for you. So hopefully we can take up some of the load of the nitty gritty, but we can amplify, your voice and those from Can Recover. So so people are putting some comments in there. Aaron, what's next on your career? We'll do that one and then we'll open it up to the group.
What's next in my career? A lot. Right now, I recently started an organization. It's a consulting and insurance agency practice called Future Weight Benefits. So that's certainly taking up quite a bit of my time. But I just continue to try to go down a path where I can make an impact in the areas that I'm passionate about.
And everybody's got their videos off, which just looks like a whole bunch of black boxes there. If anybody wants to turn their video on, there's Allison. We like to see faces, even if you're eating your lunch. We don't care if you're in your car, you're walking your dog. It's chill time. So hi, Callie, our amazing intern right now, who I talk to 15 times a day, and cheer. Would anyone like, in the time that we have left, would anyone like to ask Aaron a question or congratulate him in his, I feel like, partnering with us to continue his work? So anyone like to share? Allison?
I don't have anything off the top of my head right now.
All right.
Really good work though. And I'm aware of what goes into starting a nonprofit. So strong work. And I fully agree with the concept of doing something to help others helps you recover. I've found the same thing to be true.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
And I think there's a lot of nonprofits out there with their, as you said much more eloquently than I, that if you don't see someone that looks like you and sounds like you, whether that be the sport, the interest, the color of your skin, the sexual orientation, like if you want to create something, there are other people like you, and what I would like to do is be a space where, that smaller organizations can come and still operate, with their own identities and with meeting those needs for people, because I do think that's incredibly important.
Absolutely.
Callie, do you have any thoughts?
I'm super excited to hear your story and everything that you're doing with us. So thank you for joining and everything. If there was one thing that you could tell high school or college athletes that got a concussion, what would you tell them?
I would tell them to, one, that they're not alone through their recovery, and two, to be honest with themselves and with others. I think one of the bigger challenges of my own recovery was not acknowledging what I was going through emotionally, and being able to address that. And at the same time, feeling comfortable sharing what you're going through so that you can be taken care of, not just emotionally, but medically, and through your support system, the best way that they know how, because they can really only do as much as you allow them to, which I know can be hard at times, but you're not alone. That was a good question. Thank you.
I think we talked about this morning, whether it's how medical providers are offering up social work or counseling to athletes, with concussions, or how those athletes with concussions that are already, their guard is up because they're not performing the way that they, whether it's how the message is given or how the message is received, that mental health supports mean a weakness or a failing, or wow, they must think I'm really bad if they're now suggesting counseling. I've also had people come in and say, well, once they started suggesting counseling, I knew they didn't think it was a concussion anymore. And they, thought I was now crazy. So it's how to make that invitation more inviting to someone that's going through their concussion journey.
Yeah, it's absolutely a challenge because of the nuances of post-concussion syndrome and a prolonged recovery, and being able to decipher what is caused by that versus what is the other stressors or the other triggers in my life that's being exacerbated because of my concussion. It's really complicated. And like I said, I think the stigma has changed significantly. So I think there's more of an open dialogue to really hone in on what's going to be appropriate and what's going to be effective. But certainly when I was going through it 10 or some odd years ago, I knew nothing about mental health support. Oh, well, very little other than, you have these resources through school or through wherever. And I didn't, quite frankly, know how to approach it because I also didn't think that the resources available to me would understand. And so I think it's kind of a double-edged sword in trying to close that gap. And I'm sure it has gotten better, and I'm sure it'll continue to get better, but I do still think that there's a gap.
Absolutely. And I do think that, if one is in a recovery phase, you have a headache, you're trying to get to classes, you're trying to get to all the other places, you're trying to get to your PT appointments, and now you're adding, another level. And I think that's kind of the, hopefully with virtual, is that those resources will be more available. From Pink Concussions, I think we have about 8,000 on our Facebook support groups, wasn't 2 weeks ago, Facebook went down. Yeah. And I was like, what do we, there are limitations to what these places are, and how we can build out, community. Somebody's running a video. It's not me.
I might have accidentally screen shared.
Katrina, did you mean to put a video up? Well, we'll just don't know. Let's see, stop that. Don't know how to get rid of that. Okay, well, we're back. So
it's Carolina. I did put a video of mild TBI.
Okay, why don't you share that link? And I was going to say that it's because we're wrapping up with time. If you have links or resources.
And it was part of my doctorate project, and because I had a lot of footage, I edited 32 short videos. Between them is mild TBI, and I would like for the Aaron Rocha to see the video. And
so what you can do is, and I was just going to announce this for everyone, there's some really nice comments in the chat space, and every other week we run this. If you want to write comments to Aaron or share links, you're welcome to do that in the chat. And then when the Zoom call is over, the chat is all recorded, and I will send that in an email so Aaron can get your comments, especially for those that maybe don't want to unmic or can at the moment, and they'd want to pass thoughts and thanks and encouragement to Aaron, that you can do in the chat space. And then I guarantee you that will go to Aaron. So thank you, Katerina. So if you put the link in there.
Can I ask you to share my email address with Aaron so that I can share the TBI video?
Yep. So you can write. You can write that. Yep, you can write that message in the chat space right there.
By the way, I'm a TBI survivor, so I have a hard time expressing myself.
Oh, that's all right. I appreciate it.
That's awesome. We'll definitely get you connected.
Okay.
Thank you, Katerina. So in the few minutes we have left, Aaron, what are any other thoughts you'd like to share? You want to share where you are now with athletics and your relationship with sport?
Yeah, well, I can watch sports again, which is great. I certainly don't play anymore, but I continue to stay active. I am back to fully physically recovered, which is great. But just as a final word, again, I just want to thank everyone for joining and taking the time and listening to my story. I hope that it was valuable, and I look forward to continuing to work with Katherine and continue to drive that mission and provide support to those going through a prolonged concussion recovery. And thank you very much, and I hope everyone continues to enjoy their holidays.
Well, thank you, Aaron. And I want to thank you because your message is so heartfelt, and at a time where there certainly wasn't anything with sports and military together. And I'm sure that you learned. Actually, just wanted to ask one more question. What similarities or differences did you see in sharing with somebody, in a military setting about their brain injury?
Well, oftentimes it's derived from something different, whether it be in training. So, like I said, Mike went to West Point, which is the United States Military Academy. And one of the main reasons that we entered into that silo. So it might be from explosion, it might be from training, it might be from something outside of sport. And their lifestyle is also very different in the commitments that they have, and really the seriousness in the commitments that they have and the challenges that they faced. But in terms of similarities, and this is true from beyond student athletes, from beyond people in the military, is we're all human, and we're all going through similar bouts when it comes to a prolonged concussion recovery, whether it be the physical symptoms, whether it be the emotional challenges. And you can draw a lot of similarities and empathize with that, really with anyone going through it. And so while the day-to-day might be different, while the logistics might be different, in many ways it is also very similar.
Then one other question that I had for you is, so where would you like to see resources used, in the next 5 to 7 years in this space, just say for the college athlete? Like where would you like to see some changes made? You've watched the space change over the last 10 years, and what would you like to see sort of, in the next wave?
I think there's a lot of opportunity, particularly on the mental health side, to be able to provide support that's more specialized to a student athlete. And the reason I say that is because, like I said, a lot of collegiate athletes have been playing sports their whole lives. And a lot of high school athletes have been playing sports their whole lives. So that's really what they know. That's how they identify. And in an instance where that's taken away, whether it is through a concussion or even through, a torn ACL or some other significant injury where they're no longer playing, the challenge of that identity foreclosure or losing, really having a sense of losing part of your identity, which goes beyond your own identity, but also your relationships and your social sphere, etc. I think there's still a lot of opportunity to really provide support with for mental health specialized in that space who will understand what the athlete's going through.
And when do you think that mental health piece should be offered?
About 15 years ago, at least.
Yeah, and then with the process, do you think that athletes should be offered that, at the start of their concussion process, or that 3 to 4 week mark, or where do you see that mental health piece? And again, the research hasn't been done. I just talked to someone in the UK that's working on that. Like, we don't know the answer yet, but which is true a lot of things in concussion. But where would you think that would be the most useful?
It's a difficult question to answer, because I think it's different for each person. But I do think that knowing it's available is crucial, because as much as people might not retain something that they don't need in that moment, one of the things that we were trying to do for Can Recover was have it available to athletic trainers at different institutions, where we just want you to know that we're here for you if you need us. And someone might reach out as soon as they get a concussion. Someone might reach out after 2 years, and we saw a spectrum of that. So I think having the knowledge that it's available and accessible, and it's easy to access, I think is also critically important. I think that's really how it needs to be done, so that when a student athlete or anyone is ready to make that call, or reach out or try to find additional support, they know where to get it.
Yeah, I think absolutely your story really shows that in many cases, it's a layering of concussions. It's your, the first experience, a lot of times in middle school, and maybe the second experience is in high school, and then the third one in college, like that we come as individual people with individual brains into this very unique injury. But that landscape of what we've been through on our way there definitely, shapes who you are in that moment.
Absolutely. And it evolves over time.
Yeah. So now again, any final words there? Yeah, I could go talk to you all day. You're so fascinating. So any other thoughts you have?
No, I don't think so, but certainly if people have additional comments or questions, like Katherine said, throw them in the chat. I'd be happy to look over everything and get back to you. But again, appreciate your time.
Well, and I want to thank you and everybody that's a part of Can Concussion, all your donors, all the people, all your volunteers, everything that was a part of your organization. We are so happy to fold you into partner with us. And I look forward to working with you to build out the Can Recover page and a way for people to contact you. And you will be seeing Aaron in future Pink Concussions events and stuff. And, I feel like we've always really wanted to have that, really strong athlete piece. So I thank you for making us a better organization by coming along board.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
And thank you, everybody. Have a safe and healthy holiday. Hope you're all boosted and get to spend time with your loved ones. And we'll be back the first Thursday in January, and I'll send out some really interesting guests for January and February. And that's it. Thank you so much. Thank you, IBIA. Thank you, NABIS. Thank you, Margaret, Jennifer, and Megan for being our great control room there. When I run my Zoom meetings without you, I definitely miss you all. So I really appreciate all your help this season, and appreciate everyone that keeps coming back. So everyone, take care. Thank you. Bye.